Well, hey, my friend, so glad that you are with me on the podcast today. I was on Facebook the other day and got introduced virtually to Jason Leith, who is an incredible artist out in California, and was like, oh my gosh, I got to get this guy on the podcast because I would love his story and what he's up to. So, Jason, man, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
So good to be here. I love this podcast, and it's such honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. For those folks who, I'm sure a lot of people know who you are, but for those who may just be getting to know you and that sort of thing, give us the thumbnail sketch of who you are, what you do creatively, and where you are in the world.
Yeah, so I'm here in Orange County, California, and for the last 12 years or so, I've been pursuing using the arts to integrate with relationship and with people and with doing God's work in the kingdom. And for the last 10 years, that's looked like working at Saddleback Church, leading an arts ministry, mostly for visual artists who want to bring Jesus to the world through their creative gifts. And so I've been at Saddleback my whole life. I love this church, and now I get to be an arts pastor here. And then alongside that, I have projects. I just really get fired up when I get to use the arts to be someone who sees people who are unseen, see people in the margins. That's really what gets me up many mornings, is to see people in the margins through my gift of portraiture. I love making portraits, and it's such an incredible gift to be able to see people and to give them a gift of beauty. And so I've been working on that for the last 10 years in all these different ways, and it's always taking a different turn and a different iteration. But those are two things that really keep me going with arts and faith most of the time.
Love that. Love that. You know, I'm thinking about my days of being a worship pastor and being involved in local church ministry and walking with people and that sort of thing. Sometimes your own creative voice and your own studio practice is the last thing that you get to because you're focused on helping everybody else. How does that look like for you as far as what you're doing on a daily basis, as far as your own studio practice and creating and that sort of thing?
Gosh, yes.
Agreed.
I have to put it on my calendar. We have a program every summer called Working Artist Initiative, where we help artists to get to that thing that they want to be doing, but we're always talking about it, dreaming about it, writing about it, but doing it is a different thing. And so the thing that I've found, and I tell our working artist groups, is to put it on your calendar. Don't just say, I'm going to do this sometime on Saturday. Say, I'm going to do this Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. Put it on your calendar, just like you would any other business appointment or any other coffee with a friend. That is the only way that I can get to it, or else I will not do it. Something else will take its place, even if it's the most meaningless thing. So that's really my secret. And then giving myself due dates. We love due dates as artists, as people who create things for sometimes they don't have an immediate place to be. But if we give ourselves due dates, that's a winner right there.
Yeah, I'm the same way. When I did my art business over the years, I could have, if I have something that's just sitting out there, doesn't mean anything. But as soon as I put a date on it, goes on the whiteboard, then it's like, okay, this is the real deal. So
yes. And if you apply to a show, or if you apply to something, then they kind of give you that, like, if you can't, uphold your own kind of like faux due dates, when you apply to stuff, that helps to put in some real due dates too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I can tell just by looking at you online and just our little bit of getting to know each other and that sort of thing, you're equally as passionate about people as you are about making art, seeing art, not only seeing art in your life, but also seeing art make an impact and that sort of thing. When I'm interested in your life, when did you start to realize that this creative investment that God's put inside of you had the power to release transformation in the lives of others? Did that start with you? And then how did you begin to see God use your own creative gifting?
Yeah. I was really young. I was 18 years old. I had just turned 18, and I went on a mission trip to India with my church. Wow. And at that time I was applying for a college. And I was trying to figure out, when I was going to Biola University, they were telling me to choose a major. And I was like, man, I don't know what major to choose, because I love the arts. I love drawing. I love painting. I love making portraits. I want to be an art major, but I love working with people, and I love mission, and I love cross-cultural relationship building. Like, what do I do? Do I choose art? Am I an artist or am I a
Yeah.
missionary? And for that entire month, you can see me just agonizing in my journals, like, God, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to be an artist or a missionary? And after a month of asking, I think God was just fed up, and I just had this intense feeling and this vision in my mind just come to me in a moment. It was as if God answered, and I could hear this almost audible, you can do both.
Mm.
You can do both.
Yeah.
And immediately I just felt this sense of relief and this joy come over me that I could do both art and mission. And I did not have to choose between the two. And I had these visions in my mind immediately come to me of what that could look like. I saw myself making portraits of people who I met in the slums of India. I saw myself making things with people as a way to build relationship. And immediately the Spirit just gave me this gift of seeing just some small possibilities of how that could work. And ever since, I've just been pursuing all these different ways of making that happen.
I love that. I think so many times people will have a vision or an inspiration from the Holy Spirit, and they get hung up on the how, like, I don't see how this would happen, or I don't know anybody else is doing this, or this doesn't make sense in my mind. But it seems like for you that you were just willing to continue to say yes, step by step, and the Lord unfolds that. I mean, I'm sure that's, like, for all of us, that's not the most comfortable journey for any of us, but it sounds like that's the journey that you've been on with that. Is that right?
Yeah, I thought that I was the first person in the world to have that revelation. And then as I got into it, I was like, whoa, God's told this to a lot of people. He has given this permission to hundreds and thousands of people, and I get to join the party. And
He's got a plan for this. This is amazing.
Imagine that. I'm stepping into God's greater plan, and it's not just all about me. Imagine
Mm.
that. So yeah, I got to start connecting with people who had been doing that for decades, and to see the story that God is writing with artists to be part of His kingdom work in the world. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think back when I wrote Unlocking the Heart of the Artist 10 years ago. This is 10-year anniversary actually this year, which is pretty cool. It's like, what? But
yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. But I've been doing a revision of the book for this year and everything, and just kind of revisiting some of those stories and all that. And I remember when I first put that down on paper, starting in 2008, 2009, before it came out in 11. And you think you're like, I'm the only artist that's ever had this inner angst that's ever gone through, this kind of thing. But then you put it out there. And I think that's the beauty of story, right? Is that when we put our story out there, God then draws people around that story to say, hey, there's healing available, there's transformation available. And you're not only doing that in your life, but you've also been very intentional, it sounds like, of reaching out to others and trying to be this conduit of healing and transformation and revelation, to use a big word, in other people's lives. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, or a lot about, what you're doing with Sacred Streets, because I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful concept that you're bringing to the wider body of Christ and to the world, and really speaking to the difficulties that people are experiencing in their life, and using art as a means of grace in the middle of that. So how did that start for you?
I think it started just having a passion for seeing people who feel kind of lost and unseen, forgotten. I'm a middle child of 5. And so actually, I feel like it comes in with my story.
Yeah.
Even though I'm very privileged and did not grow up disadvantaged at all, still, that's part of my story. Is I felt like, I just need to stay in the background, not let my needs be known, and just, and honestly, looking back, I'm like, I think I felt actually unseen a lot of the time. And now that's something that I can move toward people who are feeling unseen in a much greater way. They're literally living in a ditch, in an alleyway, or an abandoned lot that nobody even thinks about. And to see people, the first person that I decided to go and make a portrait with, was really, really scary. Actually, I knew it was what I was supposed to do, but I was still shaken in my boots to go and approach this man. But I had just had a life of loving people who were unseen. And I'm like, I got to do this with that thing that I love to do. I got to do this with drawing. I just feel like there's going to be some power there. I had this hunch. And so I approached this man named Steve, who was at the very back end of an abandoned lot, literally living under these trees, kind of near a ditch. And I just approached him. I said, hey, I think the place that you've chosen to settle down is actually really peaceful. Because it was just kind of lots of overgrown grass and trees. And I really love this landscape. Like, I know this might sound crazy, but can I make your portrait and just draw the landscape in the background and your portrait in the front? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so we sit there for 45 minutes, and all I had was a mechanical pencil and some graph paper from my journal that was in my car. It was not the ideal tools.
Right.
I like wanted my charcoals, and I wanted like the big sketch pad and like the drawing board, but all I had was a little mechanical pencil and some graph paper. And I drew that man for 45 minutes, and I got to know his story. And I just saw right then and there that our friendship was able to develop in a way that would never have developed without that portrait between us, because it just opens up both him and myself in a unique way where he feels safe, because what the portrait does is it allows that person to see, I think this person actually really does care about me. They're literally taking 30 minutes of their time to study the details of my iris and how the way that my mouth is formed. And they're really looking into my eyes. I just imagine that's it's going through the other person's head while I do this. And they're like, yeah, I'll tell you my story. Yeah, I'll tell you my struggles. Yeah, because there's this trust that forms with the arts. And so I saw this happen. And one amazing thing that Steve said a couple weeks into our friendship, or months, it was a while ago now. So he said, Jason, when I'm with you, I feel human again.
How beautiful. Yeah.
That is something to go towards. I was like, man, if that's happening with this one guy, I think I need to do this with more people. I love the idea of helping people to realize and appreciate their humanness in the image of God, and that they have value and that they're not forgotten. And if my drawing can do that, if my little sketch can be a conduit to making that happen even more, then I'm going to go do this.
I love so much about that. And I'm just thinking, so much of what we talk about on this podcast and, my life in particular is helping artists bring their art life, spiritual life, business life together, making a living from your art, that sort of thing. I think it's so easy for us to forget, that all of us, 100% of artists, start out in this place of just raw inspiration and movement of the Holy Spirit inside of us that, that says, I want to create something. I want to make a difference. I want to get this beauty out, whatever it is. And I love, it's just profound. I think that the way that you have been able to and continue to hold your art in this beautiful place where you're not necessarily expecting it to be provision for your life or whatever, but it's really a gift that you're choosing to give, and a gift through which you're hoping and believing, expecting God to move through powerfully. What does that do to the way that you make? Because I know, obviously you make your living, through the other work that you do and that sort of thing. So how does that change the dynamic for you with your art being in this situation a gift rather than a vehicle for provision in your life? Not that either one is right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. So in college, I started asking God, because I had that clarity that I was supposed to work with art and people. It was basically like making art and doing social work.
Yeah.
And I was like, those are two very not lucrative careers. if you allow them to be, they can be kind of like lower paying. And so I was just asking God, I'm like, God, I'm gonna go for this, but I just ask for you to provide.
Yeah.
I just ask for you to provide. I'm gonna do this faithfully, I don't see a great outlook for my finances. So I just ask you to provide. And funny enough, connected to this story of making Steve's portrait, that portrait was so instrumental for me being able to be hired at Saddleback Church, where I've worked for the last 10 years.
Wow.
What the person who hired me, what he was able to see was that I really was right for leading other people in arts ministry. You know, I was making this portrait for free. I was doing it on my own time in the in-betweens between my college classes, just because I felt like it was what God was calling me to do. And I was just being faithful to that call.
I love that.
And so he was like, I think you're the guy. Like I'm looking at, it was just like the tiniest little thing, but I think he saw the heart of it. And because of that, I was able to expand on that and grow in that. So I'm definitely an advocate for radical faith that doesn't make sense, and doing the obedience, even when you don't see the dollar signs in front of you.
Sure.
But then also alongside of that, being a faithful entrepreneur and being wise with how you use your time and being strategic as well. I think the mix of those two things, like you'll be unstoppable as a person who's working for the Lord. You'll be able to provide for yourself and your family. But I think, you know, the faithfulness and the obedience comes first. And then if you bring the strategy into that, which you teach on all the time, if you listen to that, like you teach on both these things so well, Matt. And so I think the mix of those things is a dangerous, good combo.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's totally that loaves and fishes thing, right? We bring what we've got and God becomes the accelerator in the middle of that. So it starts with Steve, and then you start to think, I should do this more. You start sharing the idea with friends. I mean, how did this evolve? Because the beautiful thing now, website, the show that you guys had, this installation, I mean, like, wow, I want to ask you some details about that. But how did you go from one portrait on the side of the road in the back of a lot to this movement of inspiring other artists and taking the show around and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it got really big because I decided that I didn't want just to show the portraits in a gallery in LA or Orange County, but I felt the deep desire and compulsion to show them on the streets where the people were living that I was making the portraits of. I wanted these to be accessible to the people that they were telling the stories of. And I wanted it to be part of the story of what was happening on the streets. I didn't want to put it away in a white walled gallery. The second reason I wanted to build this big space on the streets was because I saw the impact of art that was in public spaces. I saw the impact of street art and public sculpture and social practice. And I felt passionate about being part of that. I saw the impact of it in like kind of what I call like dinner table conversations. Like, hey, did you see that thing yesterday? That was so cool. What did you think about that?
Yeah.
You know, we do that with movies all the time. And we do that with, I think, murals that we see on the street or things that happen as we're walking down the promenade. It's hard to me, is my opinion, it's harder to do that with a formal gallery space. Sometimes people feel a little bit intimidated by that. And that's not to say don't do that, but I just loved the idea of being part of those easier like conversations for people and making it feel more accessible. So because of those two reasons, I was like, I'm going to do this on the streets. And so what it started turning into was building this temporary structure on the streets that I realized soon that it had to be up to code and that it had to be actually pretty large for my audience to be able to fit inside there and to fit the 12 portraits inside. And what it developed into was something that I had to raise $10,000 for on Kickstarter. And I had to have a team of 5 interns, and I had to have hundreds of volunteers. And I basically had to dedicate my life to this and quit everything else for 6 months to be able to pull this off. I didn't realize what I was getting into really, but it was this, at the point where God gave me the vision of this space, I just felt like there was no other way to do it than to do that. And so I was just kind of like moving forward with a crazy eye, just being like, okay, I'm going to make this happen. And even, I mean, I was still in college at the time, and my professors were saying like, don't don't do this, man. Like, this is not a good idea. You're not going to be able to complete this.
Wow.
But
because did you do all the pieces in the show or installation? I mean,
yeah, I had 12
12
portraits in there. And so I was doing a couple portraits a month with people on Skid Row. And
wow.
honestly, the whole process taught me about not relying on my own strength and power and willpower. I am someone who can really pull off a lot with willpower, and I can get a lot done, and I can find a way to make it happen.
Right.
But even this was like way beyond that kind of willpower to make something happen. And my prayers changed that 6 months. They changed from, I had this moment in my studio where I was making one of these portraits, going back to the studio at 12:30 in the morning. And I had to finish this next portrait to be on schedule for this show. And I had zero energy, absolutely zero, down to the bone. I wanted
not feeling it, right?
I wanted to cry, honestly. And I couldn't figure out how to make this thing work. You know, in those moments in your studio, where like, I do not know how to make this work.
Right.
I feel like I need to throw this away or just move on. But I had to make it work. I didn't have a choice. And my prayers in that moment, as I fell to my knees and asked God in a new way, I didn't ask him, God, help me to do this. I said, God, I have nothing. And I ask that you be the one to come in here and complete this portrait. You can use my body, you can use my mind and heart and skill in any way you want, but I have nothing. And I need all of you.
Yeah.
Because there's none of me. And really, I felt like after that, I was like, that actually needs to be a little bit more how my prayers sound every day. Even if
start there again tomorrow.
Right? I was actually able to finish that portrait that night. And I felt like I had this renewed sense of energy, that God did a miracle in that moment. He didn't have to, but by his grace, he did. But he was teaching me a lesson that, like, my prayers are not about him just giving me what I need. It's about, it's a greater partnership than that. It truly is God's power moving through me, and me kind of like emptying myself in order for his goodness to move through me. So yeah, it was crazy what we pulled off. And if you look at my website, it will look impressive. And I'm like, how did I do that at 21 years old? But like, honestly, there was so many ways that God did miracles in that time and gave me so much help in that time to pull those things off.
One of the things I really loved about just the installation, the structure and all that was your choice of materials. And I'm a really big believer, I think, for just from an artistic perspective, but also spiritually as well, materials matter. And it's really, I think every good artist, great artist that I know is really practices this idea of limiting your palette and choosing the necessary things to really speak what you want. What can you take out of the process as opposed to what you can put in. And I was just really struck by the, I guess, variety and yet cohesiveness of the visual voice and material voice that you used in that. So talk about that, because it seemed like you just were grabbing anything that you could to create on, but I'm sure there was intention behind that. And there is this beautiful flow that happened, maybe in spite of, or maybe intentionally, I don't know, but talk about materials in the middle of that.
Yeah, it's actually, I feel like it's somewhat similar to your process, Matt, where you're moving into, you're finding your materials from natural spaces, and you're pulling them out of the ground or off of like places that people would never see. And you're collecting them and bringing them back to your studio, and you're transforming them into these works of art. And I think my process was really similar, except instead of walking through forests, I was walking through street alleyways and looking through downtown LA dumpsters to find these materials. And so a lot of them, they came from these environments where it's like you're just picking it off the street and bringing it back and redeeming it. And I say redeeming it, what I love, I feel like where I get most creative is not from a blank canvas, but from taking these materials and trying to figure out, like, how do I make this work?
Yeah.
How do I make this valuable again? How do I
Right.
make this beautiful and cohesive again?
Mm.
And that challenge, that puzzle, it really makes my artwork come alive. And I feel like that's how I work best as an artist, is when I'm using these found objects and doing this kind of assemblage work.
Yeah.
And Barry Kramis, you'll have to look up Barry Kramis. He taught me a lot, probably everything I know actually about assemblage and putting together these found objects to make them feel actually cohesive.
Yeah.
People say about your work, Matt, that it looks like you found it that way in nature.
Right.
And really that should be the goal, that it should look natural. It shouldn't look forced. And so, yeah, color has a lot to do with that, the cohesiveness of color. And I wasn't afraid to like dye things or paint things or with the texture, like sand things to make that all the same texture. So I loved working with those found objects. And what I was really trying to do was show how God makes all things new. He makes all things new. And that's what I was trying to convey in these portraits. And God is going to do that with the new heavens and the new earth. He's going to make everything new, because he's a God who resurrects and makes things come to life again. He does that with people, and he will do that with cities, and he will do that with places and spaces. And so I got to kind of say that in my portraits as I made these materials, and these portraits come together in these, what I would say are like sacred compositions. I was trying to mimic kind of like icons or altar pieces that you would see in a cathedral space. And by that show not just the beauty, but the goodness and the truth that can be found in these men and women that I was making portraits of.
I just love it. I'm reading in the middle of kind of reading and rereading Mako's new book, Art and Faith, and new creation. I'm hearing that over and over. I just I love that, and I think we often forget. We too easily forget that is our role in the kingdom, is to reveal and to reflect this new normal, this newness, new creation of the kingdom, and that when people see our work, they get to see a new normal and a new reality. And I'm thinking about, all the other implications of doing something like this, my practical mind in setting up something in, a marginalized part of town, probably not the safest area of town, that sort of thing. I'm thinking about what other people had to say about what you were doing, both positive and negative. Who is this guy coming in here doing this and that sort of thing? So how did you deal with that? How did you walk in this way that both honored the people that you're walking with, which is obviously your heart, and at the same time probably had to fend off some of the naysayers and haters as well, saying that you're just kind of coming in taking advantage of the situation for your own art?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that, because if you're someone out there who wants to do something good in society with your artwork, and you want to maybe interface with people who are in the margins of society and use your artwork for doing something good, there's a way to go about it that's healthy, and there's a way to go about it that honestly ought to be criticized, because and you won't do it on purpose. I promise you will not be doing this on purpose.
Right.
No one's trying to hurt anybody. But I know there's a book out there called When Helping Hurts. And if we're not studied up on this, then we can easily fall into that. And I think one of the principles is that we're not coming in to give all of us in a way that people are lacking. Like, I have some answers, I have some beauty to give you, I need to be here to elevate you. That's what can kind of happen just by default.
Sure.
We're trying to help. But one thing that I think the Lord is asking us to do when we're helping in a place that feels like it's lacking is not to just bring but what we have, but to look for what the Holy Spirit is already doing in that place and in that space, and elevating that and highlighting that and partnering with what the Holy Spirit's already doing. Even if that person is not a Christian, there is a great possibility that God is already working with that person, and there's something to learn. There's something to understand more from where we're coming from. There's a notion that we might have in our head that needs to be flipped. So come and listen first, is what I've learned. And then after you've listened for an uncomfortable amount of time, you're like, I just can't help but speak now. Maybe listen a little more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then maybe it's time to bring what you have to bring, because I don't have a shadow of a doubt that God is working in every corner and every place in the world. And the more you listen and look for where you can partner rather than bringing your thing right away, I think the healthier it's going to be, and the more it's really going to partner with what God's already doing. It's kind of a belief that God loves to use us, but he doesn't need us. He's already working in those places, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, working in, just to answer the other part of your question, working in downtown LA and working with people who have several needs, I wanted to work with them as much of a long term as possible. But I'm just one guy, right? And if you're going out there to do something, maybe you're just one person. So being connected to an organization that can really take that baton from you once you exit, or once you are not able to be there anymore. Like, I was partnered with the Union Rescue Mission in downtown LA, and they've been there for 100 years, and they're always going to be there. So I did as much as I could to connect every person that I was with to the Union Rescue Mission, and always connecting back to this organization, always connecting back to the local church, because I couldn't do it all. I was just there to give this moment of beauty, because the rescue missions were giving food, they were giving shelter,
practical needs,
we can give, as artists, is we can bring this unique piece of beauty that really, it helps people to be able to even access the food and access the shelter, because suddenly they feel like, maybe I am worth that shelter.
Yeah.
Maybe I do have enough value to say yes to this recovery program, because they all of a sudden feel elevated in their identity, and that allows them to access everything else.
Yeah.
So those are a few things. There's so much more that can be said there, but the long-term connection and going in and listening first, those are two really good ways that we can healthfully do social work as artists.
You've got a great video on your website of a guy named Robert, who I'm thinking of as you're telling that story of, you went in listening, you went in serving, and the transformation that happened in his life as a result was pretty doggone incredible. Just share that story real quick, because I think our listeners would just love that.
And I love what happened with Robert, and I'm blown away by it to this day, because it's the very thing that I deep down kind of secretly hoped would happen with my work, but I wasn't bold enough to say that this is what I hope happens. And what happened with Robert was I was at the end of my day and making portraits, and I was about to go home, but then he caught us. He caught me, and I happened to have a guy with a camera there that day. And he basically told us right then and there, he's like, you're going to make my portrait because I want to share my story. I want my story to be shared with the world. And the thing is, though, that his story that he wanted to share at the time when we met was not exactly the story that I was thinking about sharing. As I listened to his story for some time, his story was one from his perspective of a man who is addicted to some hardcore drugs for 20 years, lived on the streets for 20 years, and he was at the end of his life, and he only had a few more months or years to go before his life was over. And he wanted that story to be told to people so that they wouldn't do what he did in his life. I listened to that, and the story that I was starting to see in him was not a story of a man who was about to die, not a story of darkness, but possibly a story of redemption, possibly a story of a man who is able to turn his life towards the power of the Holy Spirit at the end of his life and find a resurrection moment.
Wow.
He lifted up his shirt to say, can you draw these, what they looked like boils on his abdomen and kind of coming down to his hands. He said, I want you to draw these because those represented the drug abuse and the effects of the drug abuse on his body. And he's like, I want you to draw these to show the horror of my life. And I said, Robert, I see those. And I had this piece of paper in my hand that I had picked up from the side of the street, and it had all these punctured holes in it, these perfectly kind of grid of punctured holes that I think belongs in the bottom of a box of like bananas or vegetables or something. And it was this thick cardboard paper. I said, Robert, if I placed your body just right on this paper, these punctured holes could represent what I'm seeing on your abdomen, but it doesn't, Robert, it doesn't have to be this story of horror. What if these holes with the light coming through the back, what if these represented moments in your past that you were able to overcome with the power of God, and that you're able to live a life of flourishing in your future? And you could just see his head, just kind of the cogs turn in his head, and something move in his eyes where he started to see the possibility of this being his story. And as I drew his portrait for that hour, it was just a really fun time to be with him and to make his essence on this little scrap piece of paper with my charcoal. And I came back for a second session about a week later. And Robert was always supposed to be in the same spot, but he was not in that spot that day. And people told me that he hadn't been seen for the last several days, which was really irregular. I got a phone call actually that same day, and it was Robert.
Wow.
And he said, hey, Jason, I just want to let you know that I checked myself into a rehab center, and I am not living on the streets anymore. And it's all because of your portrait. It's like,
come on,
Jesus. It's like, in my head, I was just like, I kind of passed over everything he said because I didn't believe it. And I said, Robert, after 20 years, like, what made you decide to check into a rehab center after all these years?
Yeah.
He said, kind of frustrated. He was like, I told you.
I just told you.
It was because of your portrait. And he said, I saw myself truly for the first time. Whoa.
Yeah. Big moment.
Just blown away. And this was similar to the Steve moment, but I will never not be surprised and just overcome with gratitude that God chooses to use these humble gifts in this way to allow people to see themselves in a new light. And Robert decided to turn his life around because of this drawing and this moment of just showing him through this art, right? It was through the art that he was able to see another vision of how his life could go. So, man.
Wow, so powerful. So powerful.
Yeah.
So does the show travel now? I mean, did you do it only there? Is it gone around to other places now, or where is the show as we speak?
Yeah, so I have been traveling it around. It's been shown all over the country, and I still have probably 8 of the portraits in my possession. So I love to show them. If anybody wants to show them, I still love to show those portraits. I've recently given one to one of the subjects who, her name is Dawn, and she recently got an apartment for herself. And the first thing she wanted to do was hang up her portrait in her home. And so I gave that to her. You'll have to see that one on the website. But yeah, I am continuing to do different iterations of Sacred Streets. I've been painting on tents recently, on actual camping tents, and making people's stories on the outside and the inside of tents. There's many different iterations of it, but yeah, the story continues.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. I'm thinking to myself now, all right, we got to have you bring this to Asheville, because
let's do it.
As I was saying before, I'm on the board of our Western Carolina Rescue Mission, which is just doing incredible work. In fact, you'll love this at our conference every year, our Thriving Christian Artist Conference. Since, we're not a ministry per se, we're a business. And so I love to do a give back every year, and we always receive an offering. And we raised in just about, I think it was less than 2 hours, we did this. It was an online conference this year. We raised, I believe it was $43,000 for the rescue mission, just from the artists that were there online. Just like, go to this website and give. And it was like, yes, I just love it. But I love when we can use either our finances or our creative gifting, whatever it is, to further the things that God's doing in the earth. And so I really would like to talk to you about that, because I think that'd be awesome to.
Yes, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, listen, I know people are going to want to know where they can connect with you and that sort of thing. So tell them about your website and where they can just see all the beautiful video and that sort of thing you have about Sacred Streets.
Yeah, audio is one thing, but the visuals are another. So check out sacredstreets.org if you want to see a video of that space on Skid Row that we were talking about, that sacred space built out of trash. Or if you want to see any other work that I've been doing lately, Jason Leith Art is my Instagram, and that's kind of what I keep most updated. So check out the Instagram, Jason Leith, Leith art, and would love to connect with you on there. Just send me a direct message, and I'd love to see what you're making too.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put both of those links in the show notes so people have those. But Jason,
Yeah.
what a privilege to get to know you a little better and share your story. I hope this is the first of many times we get to talk, but enjoyed having you. Thanks so much.